Hi, my name is Random Tuesday, and in this video I'm going to talk you through my Kassandra from Assassin's Creed Odyssey Cosplay. For more information and resources, head over to my website randomtuesday.net, where you'll find tutorials and patterns related to this and many other cosplays. And with that, let's get started. The base layer of the dress is a shift style underdress. I used a linen rayon blend, so it's got a little bit of a drape, but it has that nice texture that linen fabrics can have. The length is gonna hit you somewhere between kind of mid-thigh and your knees. Really depends on how tall you are and how you proportion the rest of the costume. There's no sleeves on it, so I did add some bust darts here in order to get the shaping and to stop the armholes from gaping too much. But otherwise, it's pretty much just a straight line dress, wide enough to go over the bust and the hips, and a little bit of extra wiggle room in it. The bottom is just really cut to the right length all the way around, matching the reference images as best I could. I left all of the edges on the dress as raw edges, as you can see them on the reference images, and you want to make sure that your neckline can be tucked or is hidden underneath the armor. The front section here has this extra little piece of red fabric that in true Assassin's Creed style appears to serve no function or connect to anything. So I just literally sewed this on directly onto the front section of the dress so that it sits and hangs in place, and then trimmed it to match that hemline on the bottom. The next part of the costume is the skirt slash underbelt. This is made up of four sort of vaguely semicircle-like sections that sit around the waist, one on each side, and then one in the front and the back. The front and the back sit on top, and then the sides sit underneath. Now, each of these have a red edge to them. That edge is a separate sort of U strip of fabric, I should say, leather, that is glued to the top section. And that section was dyed red using leather dye, and this section was dyed dark brown using leather dye. All of this used a sort of 6-8 ounce leather that was veg tan that I could then dye it using water-based leather dye. I roughed it all up using some sandpaper to kind of give it a little bit of a more worn or weathered look. These sections also have little gold rivets that go all the way around the edge. Even though the rivets are technically functional, they don't actually rivet anything together because of the way they're situated. Although I did then use rivets to keep the whole thing together so that it becomes one piece as opposed to several pieces. The tabs were done in a similar way, although for these ones I just dyed the edge of the leather red and then taped that off and then did the center of it brown. And then at the bottom, instead of using a rivet, I found some gold buttons. These are about 3/4 of an inch in diameter, and then glued them directly to the surface of the leather. The tabs were also then just glued directly into the inside so that they stayed in place. The whole thing then sits as one piece and snaps together around the edge. The next section of this cosplay is the breastplate. Now, the breastplate was made in many layers. The base of this breastplate is a 2mm EVA foam wrapped in Worbla. Although for the boob cups, because yes, she has boob cups, I just did these out of 2 layers of Worbla. It got very messy in the end. There was a lot of trial and error, mostly error. I then did a little bit of detailing with some raised section of Worbla around the edges. This detailing was also added with Worbla over EVA foam and then just adhered directly to the Worbla. Then I marked off where I wanted the leather to be sitting and where the gold would show. So the whole thing wasn't then painted gold, although a significant portion of it was. It was done with a combination of rub and buff, some gold paint, and then spray sealed, as well as a little bit of weathering using some black acrylic and brown acrylic. All of the sections of Worbla bits had to be added before I did any of the painting because Worbla won't stick to itself once it's painted, but it will stick to itself while it is unfinished. The leather section was then cut out and water formed or wet formed, so it was stretched into the right shape, and then glued directly using E6000 to the base. The cutouts were done before it was glued, but after it was shaped, and the dyeing was also done before it was glued and after it was shaped. I then added these rivets on. They are just the heads of rivets that are glued directly to the surface rather than trying to rivet all the way through the leather, the Worbla, and the EVA foam. These right here are just some magnets that correspond with magnets that are on the shoulder strap to kind of help keep these pieces in place. The whole breastplate attaches using a combination of the O-rings that are on the costume as well as some hidden strapping. So I have 2 straps that go all the way around, although my dress form isn't as squishy as I am, so I can't do it all the way up. And then a couple of other little Velcro tabs that just help keep it in place, and then some straps that will connect the back piece and the front piece together. These also serve a little bit of a function in order to really keep those pieces kind of all nicely cinched together. The back plate was also done in the same way. It's a combination of a Worbla wrapped EVA foam base that was heat shaped and molded to really fit the curve of my body. And then this overlayer of dyed leather that was also wet shaped in order to be the right shape with these cutouts so that you can see the gold visible. Same again, glued on all of the rivets. This one has a little bit of Worbla detailing here up at the top that was painted a different color. Again, these tabs were added and then painted to allow the use of the Worbla's adhesive properties. These shoulder straps are 2 layers of this same leather, that kind of 8-ounce veg tan leather that was dyed using brown and red, with a little bit of Dremel detailing to kind of mimic that edge that you can see on the design in the actual game. These tabs were then glued directly with E6000 in the back of the breastplate and have little magnets that help guide them to the right position on the front of the breastplate. These designs up here, the kind of Medusa head, was made using the same O-rings that are found everywhere else on the breastplate and sculpted using Sculpey, then painted gold and adhered directly onto the strapping. These correspond with the little Velcro tabs to just kind of help align it on the side, but they really stay attached by using the O-rings. Like all good Assassin's Creed costumes, this costume also comes with an elaborate array of belts that seem to serve almost no function. The first belt is the main one. This was made out of just a leather strap that I found online. Then it is backed using the same red linen fabric. This was adhered using a combination of hot glue to just kind of stop it from sliding around, and the rivets that you can see that go around the belt itself. Then there are 2 larger O-rings at either end that are tied together using some leather strapping. Again, like the rest of it, the raw edges on this belt are unfinished, and the whole thing is just long enough to kind of loosely sling around the waist and then tie in place at the front. The next belt strap I didn't make out of leather. This was made out of felt, wrapped with some pleather and then just hot glued in place, and using some rivets to kind of keep everything together as well. Unlike most of the costume, these are just silver rivets, and then there are the larger rings on the side. I just have a spacer piece of leather as opposed to an actual leather holster, because the sword I bought is way too heavy to actually hang off of something like this on the costume. This one is just designed to sling over the shoulder and sit very much at the waist. The next piece is a somewhat gravity-defying section, but this is a belt that is slings over the other hip and then is tied in place on this front strap right here into 2 different sections. So this one similarly is just a strap or a strip of leather. This is just a strip of felt wrapped in pleather with some of the silver rivets, but then it has these extra little O-ring tabs on it that I just made out of Worbla painted silver wrapped around these O-rings and then just glued directly to the belt. It's not clear what function they serve, but I'm sure someone thought of something for them. Another Assassin's Creed classic is the Capelet in this case. I spent a while struggling over the reference images, trying to figure out what the heck this is supposed to be. In the end, I essentially created a asymmetrical circular cloak with a squared off edge on one side It then stitched together right here in the front, and I added in some extra pleating on the seams, and then made an entirely separate piece for this extra section that goes on the back. So this is just a rectangle that also attaches here at the front. The whole thing just slips on over the head. To give the effect of all of these lovely wrinkles, I actually stitched them in place because fabric doesn't really fall that way. The trim was then a gold sort of trim that I found at the fabric store, and I did the edging using three-dimensional gold paint to kind of give that line embroidery look that it has on the reference images. The medallion is made out of a couple layers of EVA with Warbler over the top that sits into all of those dimensional ridges, and then I painted all of it gold using Rub and Buff, sealed it, weathered it, and then sealed it. And it's stitched directly to the backside. I just created a little loop that I could then stitch the entire thing onto. I also have a little loop here that's just safety pinned on that'll allow me to hook this to one of the shoulder straps, because otherwise it has a tendency of just falling all the way down onto this shoulder. So you can see here the separate piece that is the shoulder piece as well in the back. The next sections of the costume are all of the various arm and leg accessories. Under both of the bracers there are sort of strapping fabric wrap strip things. So for one of them, I made just strips of this red fabric, about 2 inches wide. I didn't finish it at all, I just let it fray because you can again see raw edges on the whole thing. And then it just wraps around the arm several times, kind of back and forth. On the other arm, rather than making it out of leather, I found kind of a fake suede-y sort of pleather look fabric that was going to be a lot more comfortable to wrap around my arm and a lot more flexible to wear. This is again about 2 inches wide, and the whole thing ends up almost 3 yards. I just erred on the side of having more wrapping than less wrapping. On the right arm, there is a leather bracer, and this bracer is made of 2 layers of that same leather that is dyed and wet shaped into the curve. And then over the top of it, I used a combination of Sculpey to sculpt the designs onto it and then glued them directly on after they were painted and sealed. Up here where I made these sections, I made them out of Instamorph. It's a moldable plastic, operates similar to Warbler. You heat it up in hot water and then you can shape it and mold it, and it holds its shape once it's cooled. These little dots were done using three-dimensional paint, where I just painted tiny little dots on and let them dry. I then attached this front bit here using some thin leather strapping through holes. I just stitched it on. And I added some glue to kind of just keep it all secure in the back. The leather strap that keeps it attached is right here, and it's just glued to one end and then tucks underneath when I'm wearing it to keep it secure. There's a fair amount of friction on it, so it doesn't tend to come undone, but I had to monitor it a few times. And then to really keep this one in place, I have an elastic strapping that I riveted to the inside of it, and then I cover this using some extra of that red fabric to just kind of hide that elastic strap is there, but it keeps it very securely on my arm. On the left-hand side, I have just a solid Warbler bracer. I had to write the words left and right, so I remembered which one went where. This is made out of a series of pieces of EVA foam wrapped in Warbler. This has some extra layers on it where I have the design on the front. And then I just stuck it all together using the adhesive properties of the Warbler. The template for this, much like the templates for everything else, are available for purchase on my website. The rivets, I actually did rivet, although they don't hold anything together, but they do provide that look like there is rivets on it. The whole thing was then spray painted gold, rub and buffed to add some highlight and dimension, and then I used acrylic paint to add that kind of darkening and weathering look to it. I didn't do any smoothing on any of the Warbler like you might do, because you'll notice all of her gold has that kind of hammered look to it, so I just used the texture that's on the Warbler to kind of give that same effect. There's also loops that are built into the Warbler piece on the bottom, and the leather strapping just goes through them and ties it in place on my arm. For the legs, she has 2 greaves, and kind of like the arms, there's some fabric underneath. These are both leather, and so for this I just found kind of a pleather cut rectangles and I literally just wrap them in place around my leg and then use the greaves to keep the pleather in place. This is a lot more comfortable and way cheaper than using leather would have been because the leather that I used for all of this was very stiff, so I would have needed to get like a softer, more suede type leather. Totally doable, but I went with kind of a fabric option, especially because not very much of it's visible. The first greave, and this one's actually mislabeled, this one goes on the right side, is just a basic curve. Again, this was done with EVA foam wrapped in Worbla. The detailings were added by sculpting Instamorph and sticking it, adhering it directly to the Worbla. And these edges were done using just extra little bits of Worbla that I stuck around the outside. Some of this isn't double layered with Worbla, but parts that would have been visible on the inside potentially were double layered with Worbla. And then the whole thing is painted gold using the same method, some gold spray paint, some rub and buff for detailing, and then some acrylic paint for the look of weathering. This one has a elastic band, which I then cover when I fold the fabric over it to keep it in place on the top. And then it has some strapping that wraps all the way around the leg to kind of keep it in place the rest of the way up. And all of this is stuck to the inside using D-rings through some of Worbla that's adhered directly to the interior surface. The final greave was much more complicated because this is supposed to kind of go around the whole leg. Unfortunately, I didn't quite get mine close enough. I made the pattern for this much in the same way I made the pattern for most things, which is wrapping myself in saran wrap and then some tape and then drawing the pattern on it and then cutting it out. The traditional Worbla armor making method. These pieces were then individually, so there's three, a front and a side piece, were then individually cut out of EVA foam and wrapped in Worbla and then stuck together. And I shaped them as I was placing them and before I stuck them together and then also after I stuck them together to give that kind of leg curve look. Again, most of the interior is not double layered in Worbla to make it a little less bulky, but anything where it would have been potentially visible, I did add a second layer of Worbla. Then I painted it, same way with everything else. I didn't smooth it to keep that kind of hammered metal look. I spray painted it gold after priming it, rub and buffed some details and highlights, and then some acrylic paint to give those low lights and spray sealing it. To keep it onto my legs, my single leg, I have again the Worbla D-ring method, so Worbla wrapped around some D-rings with just elastic in between to give it a little bit of stretch to get it on over my leg. For my feet, I had some sandals that were relatively gladiatorial-like. They were black, however, rather than brown. That's the main downside. To make them fit in a little bit better, I just attached on just a literal strip of leather to make it kind of look like it was part of the rest of the costume and add a little touch of brown to it. I decided to go with shoes that I already owned because I knew that they were comfortable and I'd be wearing them all day at a convention rather than trying to find something that was a little bit more accurate. The final touch is the wig. This wig is from Arda Wigs. I wouldn't necessarily recommend it because the wig itself is a little bit too short to get a good braid going. You might want to look into one that has a slightly longer length so that you can get a better braid, although I do link this one on my website. It does have a very large skin cap, which allows you to get that nice deep part on the side on her head and then really pull all of that hair around. And it's definitely a good sort of color for her. And the main other thing you'll need is just some leather strapping that you're going to wrap around your braid that you put to, one, help you hide any hair ties that you're using, and two, make it look more like the reference images. The final sections of this costume are weapons, and the weapons are obviously optional. She spends a lot of time in any of the pictures holding them, although theoretically this sits at her hip. I found this online. It is a Capelet blade. It's the right sort of style, although as you can see, it doesn't have the right type of hilt. If I felt more inclined, I could have altered the hilt while still keeping this blade. Or if you want something that you can really sit at your waist and carry it around like she does, then you might want to look into making one out of EVA foam, foam core, or anything like that. I did, however, make the spear, and the spear is much lighter. This is made out of PVC pipe, Worbla, and EVA foam. So it has a PVC pipe core. The blade portion is EVA foam that I then stuck some extra foam onto for the detailing and beveled the edges of before wrapping it in Worbla. And that Worbla wrapping goes all the way down to here. This section in the middle was made out of layers of Warbler. And then here I covered it in EVA foam, same with this bit at the end to kind of bulk the whole thing out. The top section was painted silver, little highlights in gold, and then some dark rub and buff to add that kind of dirt weathering effect. The handle was painted brown using brown acrylic paint, and actually the brush strokes really do help give it more of that wood-like feel. And then I wrapped this sort of fake leather fabric around the blade here. So this is much lighter weight than the sword is. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope you found this video helpful. If you're looking for more information, head over to my website, randomtuesday.net, where you'll find patterns, tutorials, resources on this cosplay and many others. You can also check out any of my other cosplay tutorial videos or catch me live on twitch.tv/randomtuesday, where I'm always happy to answer questions. And lastly, and never leastly, thank you to each and every one of my patrons over on Patreon who helped make this video possible. If you would like to and are able to help, then a small monthly amount over on Patreon can go a really long way. Thank you so much for watching.